to speak of, except for immediate family. So this is my first time speaking on anything like this. I did give a poster presentation at the IANS conference last August, but not a speaking position like this. So this is exciting for me, and I'm a bit nervous, so bear with me. My experiences started when I was 18 months old. I did not have a near-death experience then, but this leads into some of the other things that happened. When I was 18 months old, my dad was building a house because I have two twin brothers that are older than I am, and I was the third child to come along. They needed a larger place. So Dad built a new home. And he was so excited that it had been framed in, and he wanted to show Mother the house. And so we went over as a family, and the walls were just studs. You could see through them, but there was a plywood floor and sides on the house, but no door. And Mom was holding me in the crux of her arm, and wisps of her hair were going across my face because there was a breeze through the house on this day, and it was cold because it was winter. And he was excitedly telling Mother about the house. But at 18 months old, you don't have the verbal skills to understand a lot of things. But I knew what he was saying. I knew what the house was going to look like. And I felt like I was looking out two portholes. So that porthole effect is our soul looking out of our physical body. And I didn't know that at the time, but that's why I knew. And this is my first step at realizing that my life was planned, just like all of our lives are pre-planned coming to Earth. So that's why I knew that what the house was going to look like, where the stove was going to go, where the refrigerator was going, where the cupboards and the sink and everything was going to go, without it having been there. Then at 4 years old, my brothers were in school, and the next door neighbor, who was my best friend, was in school too. And I was bored. I was at the house with Mom, waiting for everybody to come home. And she got a telephone call. And so she sat down, talking on the phone, and they were talking about adoption. And I was curious. I didn't have anything to do. I was killing some time, I guess you could say. And I overheard their conversation. So when they got off the phone, I asked her if I was adopted. And she said, "No, silly, you're our little girl." And I said, "Okay." So then I turned, and what came out of my mouth next really surprised me. I said, "Okay, but I'm going to die young." And as I turned, I thought, I wonder what young means. So as I thought that, I had visions going through my head and of different ages that I thought I might die. But what that was I was tapped into the heavenly records, because, a lot of kids under 5, 6 years old, a lot of times have spiritual experiences because the veil of forgetfulness hasn't come down totally. And those were the ages that I had my 3 near-death experiences. I think there was only 3. I can't say for sure. I know there was 3. I don't know if there was another one for sure. So maybe I've already had the 3 that are scheduled, and the final one will come at someday. But so that is another way I know that my life was pre-planned. Then at 15, I didn't have any other experiences after that. Well, no, I did. But it wasn't a spiritual experience like that. We are guided through our lives. My brothers were out playing, and Mom always had us come in and we sat at the table and had a nice dinner. And the boys weren't home, so she asked me to go outside and find them, but don't go too far because I was still so young. So I looked out in the backyard, and they weren't there on the swing set, and they weren't down the street in one direction, and they weren't down the street in the other direction. But there were a few houses up the road. The gentleman was on his porch, and he said, I yelled across a vacant lot, and I said, "Are my brothers in there?" Because he had kids. And he said, "No, but would you like to come in and look for yourself?" Well, I thought that was kind of strange. And then I heard this little voice say, "Leave." So I said no, and I turned around and I left. That leave was my guidance to get out of there. Now I had a choice, to either honor that guidance or do my own thing. But fortunately I did, because I honored it, because later, many years later, we found out that he was a child molester. And so I was saved from him that day by listening to the guidance. But it's that inner subtle voice that you hear inside your head, like you forgot your keys, or you forgot your paper upstairs, those kind of little things, or straighten out that rug, somebody's going to trip on it. You have these things going through your mind, and this is your guidance system. And if you learn to listen to it, it will lead you on some pretty amazing paths. And so I didn't have anything after that until I was about 15. And at 15, then this was the big time for me, because it was between middle school and high school. So I was moving to a new school, and this was the dating age and the school dances and the sports, and I wanted to get involved. I was excited about this. And we had a family picnic at a park prior to school starting. And they have an orientation day at school for the kids, all the kids to come that are new there. And you can find your locker and get your school assignments, find your classes, meet your teachers if you'd like to. And I was looking forward to going to that. But before it came, I got sick. It was after the picnic. I got really sick. I don't know why, if it was food poisoning of some kind or what, I'm not sure. But anyway, I got really sick, and Mom put my sister, who was 5 years younger, she slept with me in my room, and she put her in bed with Dad, and she stayed in bed with me to watch me. And one night I woke up and I was sick, feeling really bad, and all of a sudden I felt like I was really dizzy, and my eyes kind of rolled up, and I felt like I was falling backwards, but I was in bed. How could I fall? But then when I opened my eyes up, I saw the ceiling turn to clouds. It turned to clouds, and in one side, the left side, was another opening that opened up, and then the right side was another opening. So there was two openings up there. In the left opening was get this, it was a sumo wrestler. It was a sumo wrestler dressed in white, in a white room, standing in a white light at a white table. And he kept looking at me, just kept looking at me. And he'd walk, and he was walking on real fast speed, like it was a fast film. And I thought, oh, this is really weird, but I wasn't worried about it. I was sick, but I didn't feel sick anymore. I was no longer sick. And in the other hole, I heard this beautiful music, really beautiful music. And in came this lady. It just swooped in. This lady swooped in, sounded like she was riding on music. And she had a white lace dress on. And she had really dark hair, almost black, but dark brown. And I wasn't looked at her face, because I had worked previous to school starting to earn money for buying some school clothes. And I was, I was looking for fashion. So I saw her dress, and it was just layers and layers of beautiful white lace. And I wanted to get a better look. All of a sudden, just by that intention, I was up at her dress, and I thought of her as a music box lady, because there was this beautiful music that was surrounding her. And I thought she was kind of twirling, but she wasn't. I don't think she was twirling. It's because my intention of looking at it, I was then up at her dress in energetic form, and I was flowing in and out of her eyelets on her dress, just looking through the eyelets like this. That's how small I must have gotten. And they looked like caverns, and as I was flowing in and out of them around her dress, until I came back to the point where I was before. And I thought I had settled back in my body, but I hadn't. Because just by my intention looking behind me, I knew I was at the level of the window that was behind the headboard. And that was about 2 feet above the bed. So I couldn't have been in my body. And so I knew I didn't know at the time. None of this made sense at the time because I was only 15. This is looking back after I read one of PMH Atwater's books. Now that makes sense because that was how I could describe this at the time, having the information that I had at 15. And they were looking at each other. The music box lady was turned sideways now, and she was talking to the sumo wrestler. And I couldn't hear what they were saying, but they just kept, the sumo wrestler kept watching me. And then all of a sudden, the music box lady, who I thought was Daddy's little girl, I thought of her as Daddy's little girl. She moved up and away a little bit, and my thought was, oh, Daddy's putting her up on a pedestal. And later on, well, let me finish this, because then all of a sudden the holes disappeared and they turned into balls of light, and they flew past me. And by not even moving, just changing my intention, I could see behind myself too. They flew out the house, the side of the house, because they can go through anything, went around the side of the house, and they were now bobbing up and down outside the side window, watching me. I knew they were watching me because I could see them turning like this. Now, how could I see? I don't know how I knew, but balls of light were turning like this. Then one left, went down the house, and then the other one stayed and watched me. Must have been the sumo wrestler that stayed and watched me. And then the other one came back, and then they left again. Then I settled back in my body and went and threw up. And what I later found out was that was my daughter, because she was not going to be conceived or born till over 15 years after that experience. So she had come to tell me that she wanted to be my daughter. We had obviously made an agreement or a contract of some kind. I think that's a question in the room there. And even though I didn't see the contract, I obviously knew that there was. And I must have been involved in this conversation at some point in time and settled back down in my body, but not allowed to remember the conversation, because then I would have went around trying to find her dad. How would I have known is this the right guy? Is this the right guy so that I'd have this daughter? I was not allowed to remember that information, I believe, because I would have been left searching for the right father. It was even about 30 years after that experience. I'm now 60, I'll be 65 this year. And I saw her picture on my parents' refrigerator. And I looked at that and I thought, that's reminded me of something. And it was after I had drawn the picture. And then it was bam, that's the music box lady. And there was no question in my mind. And I got pictures of her, the two comparisons side by side. There's just absolutely no doubt that it was my daughter that was there that day, that to remind me to get back in my body. So that's another form of the pre-planning of our lives. And also, then the next experience, life went on after that. Then I was in, many years later, I was working at this corporation and was their network coordinator. I'd worked there for many years and was well respected. And I got into an automobile accident. God had taken care of us because was a single mom with 3 kids, and my parents had invited the kids to come stay with them for a month, give me a break, and because we lived 800 miles away. And my parents lived in Boise, Idaho, and I live in Colorado. And they don't get to see them very often. Being a single mom, I didn't get to do things like that very often. So they said, just get them out here. So I did drive them out, and then I went back for a couple of days before I went back to work. And I wanted to plant flowers on my deck. I had rented a 3-bedroom home, and we had a nice deck out back, and I like to decorate with flowers. And so this particular day was a beautiful day, not a cloud in the sky. It was blue, real beautiful blue sky. I went to the nursery, got my flowers, and put everything in the car, was headed home. And I wasn't only maybe but a block and a half from the flower nursery, but there was this dip in the road, and there was kind of a blind spot. And as I went through the intersection, everything was fine, but there's a blind spot going down the hill. And so I was going down the hill. No cars were around. I mean, they were way back behind me because there was nothing to be concerned about. And I had stopped at the light before entering that intersection, and cars were starting to catch up. But I went through and was in the middle lane of 3 lanes, and I was listening to my easy listening music, and I was enjoying it. And I noticed that I was catching up to this car in front of me quite fast. And I thought, what's going on? Because there was no stoplight down there. It was just the bottom of the hill that then it was dipped, went back up. So I evaluated the situation, a park on the left and just a weedy grass area on the right. What's in front of him? Did a child get in front of him? I didn't know what was in front of him. And there was an empty lane on the left and an empty lane on the right. But if there was a child or something, which way were they going? I didn't know. And I had time to stop. So I did stop behind him. But then all this traffic came over the hill, and they were barreling down on us, and every line was full. And the gentleman behind me was in a pickup truck, and he was looking to his right. I don't know if he was looking to see if he could change lanes or whatever, but he did not see that I was stopped, nor the car in front of me was stopped. And my first thought in my head was, he's going to hit me. Oh God, he's going to hit me. And I hadn't put my seatbelt on, so I thought, if I put my seatbelt on and I fumble, I'm going to end up in the steering wheel. Then I heard this voice. I was by myself, but I heard this voice: lay down across the seat and cover your face. So I did what I was told. And then I felt the first impact, and also felt like was just a bump, just like a bump, like somebody bumping the side of your bed. And I thought, oh, that's not so bad. So I opened my eyes, and I saw the window shattering. And it was just real beautiful piece of art. It was just in slow motion, just creating a pattern of broken glass. And it was beautiful. Then I felt the second collision, because it had me into the car in front of me. So then that was going to propel me forward, because the first one was propelling me to the back, back in the seat, and the next one would propel me forward. So I covered my face again because I didn't want this glass to get in my face. And then I felt myself, as that collision happened, my body was was starting to lift up in the air. But instead of being lifted up in the air, I felt a big arm come under my arms and my back, and another arm come under my knees, and I was being lifted up by an unseen being. Then I was looking down on the scene from high above. I saw a car pull over to the side of the road and run across the street. Then I was snapped back into my body. But I knew I was not alone up there. I was with somebody, and I was again looking through clouds. But it was a porthole of a cloud. But it was a blue sky. So there was no clouds. I was looking in from another dimension. And then I was snapped back into my body, but I was laying in the exact same place that I had laid down across the seat. And so I sat up real fast in my head and into the driver's seat again, behind the steering wheel, because my legs were now over the steering wheel instead of under the steering wheel. I did not realize I had moved. The first person on the scene was a nurse. One of the first people was a nurse going to work, and she said she's been thrown around. The back seats are laid down. So somebody asked me, were you thrown into the back seat? And I said no, because I was back in the same position that I was in initially. And so that's that. They took me to the hospital. I don't remember the ride to the hospital. I don't remember seeing any nurses or any doctors at the hospital. I know I was, because I was hooked up to an IV. A police officer did come through the curtains and take a police report. I didn't get any tickets because it wasn't my fault, and I was completely stopped. So since I was at a complete stop, I didn't get a ticket for not having my seatbelt on because I was not a moving vehicle. And there was no airbags in those times because this was before the airbags. It kind of dates me, but yes, I'm that old. Anyway, I was released from the hospital that day with no injuries, other than my shins were scraped up from where they had went down between the steering wheel and the dashboard. My body did sustain trauma from the being thrown around the car, so my muscles started cinching up. I had to go through therapy for almost a year to get my physical body back to what it was, and I started having electrical shocks shortly after that throughout my body, up to 100 a day. That was controlled for a while, but then 6 years later, my whole life was torn down for some reason, and I started stuttering. I started shaking. I couldn't add, and that's all my job was math. I was a network coordinator, coordinating the traffic flow between plants, from the plant out to the outline salesperson. I covered around 7 portions of 7 states. It was a large area, and a lot of coordination was involved. And my job was to get the product to the salespeople and to the customers in the best fashion with the least amount of cost. And everything was math. Now I couldn't do math. Everything was gone. And that's significant because this was 6 years after the accident, had no cause for it. But after all this, after my next near-death experience, I realized what was going on, because in that near-death experience, God saved me. And there's a Bible passage that he will send his angels to protect you. And then he wants honored. So he was wanting honored. And at this point, he was tearing me down to my core being, and he was rebuilding me to honor him. Pretty exciting if you think about it, but very, very hard thing to go through, I assure you, because my whole life was torn apart. I went to see a Parkinson's specialist, and he said, no, he said, you don't have Parkinson's. He said that your subconscious is doing it. He said, it's psychosomatic. I said, what's psychosomatic? I don't understand that. He says, your subconscious is doing it. But he didn't know what the subconscious really is, but I find out, because then after this happened, my life was a mess. So we happened to get invited by my husband's cousin, who worked for the Benny Hinn Ministries, and they were doing a miracle crusade. Benny Hinn's a healer, what goes all over the world doing healing. I didn't know who he was, but my husband's cousin wanted to see us, and because he hadn't seen his cousin in such a long time, and so he offered us tickets to go so we could visit with him down there. Then my husband Gavin asked if I wanted to go, so I said sure. I wanted to meet his cousin, so we went, and at that crusade, you get caught up with the crowd and the praying and the singing, and he's a great speaker, and they were singing songs as you prayed, and the songs are important here because he's the savior of my soul. He touched me. Jesus, you're all I need. Breathe upon me, breath of God. These are the songs we sang. And as we sang, I was praying with my entire being, with my soul. I was just praying as hard as could be. Please heal me. Please heal me. And because I knew he had healed Benny of his stuttering problem. And why not me? So I knew something had happened in that car accident. Somebody saved me. So I knew something was going on. Each NDEs, I had more confidence that there was something out there that was going on. And so I was praying, and then all of a sudden I felt like like Cinderella. I was tapped on the head. And I felt like I got dizzy, but nobody was there. And Benny Hinn wasn't on stage because he went to take his a break. And it's not that Benny does the healing. Jesus does the healing through him with the Holy Spirit, because they've explained that Jesus is the healer, but the Holy Spirit is the energetic being that does the healing. He's the one that actually does it. He's the doer. Jesus is the healer. Holy Spirit is the doer. God is the creator. And so, I mean, I didn't know any of this at the time. But after we left the crusade, I told Gavin, I said, something happened. And I says, give me some math problems. He gave me some math problems and I could do some. I mean, granted, I couldn't do what I could do before, but I did some of them. And I thought that was pretty amazing. A couple of years later, I had started to develop an allergy. Don't know why, but a lot of NDEers develop allergies, sensitivities to things. And I did. I didn't know it. And it was to fragrances. And I had a plug-in next to the bed, a plug-in, so you apple pie scent, for the holidays and make the house smell good. This particular, it was getting so bad I had to take allergy medicine to clear up my nose so I could actually get some sleep. A night I went to bed and I was propped up on 3 pillows so I'd be at a 45-degree angle and could breathe a little bit better. In the middle of the night, my chest started hurting. It hurt so bad. And I couldn't get up. I couldn't get up to get help. And Gavin was laying beside me, and I reached for him, but I couldn't feel him. And I yelled for him, Gavin, help me, help me. But there was no response. And then all of a sudden, I was out of my body, looking down on the scene. I was looking down on myself and Gavin laying beside me. But my hands were still over my stomach. So obviously, I was reaching with my spirit hands, not my physical hands. And that's why I didn't make contact, because my spirit hands went through his body. I mean, that's an assumption. I didn't see them, but that's had to have been what happened. And it was obviously my spirit voice that was calling for help. But I felt great. I mean, I felt enfolded in this most peaceful love like I had never experienced before in my life. And it was unconditional. And I was in blackness, but it was the middle of the night, so that made sense. So then I looked up, that there was no stars, but still I didn't think anything of it. And I was watching my body down below. As I laid there, I could feel my spirit arms elongated out to my sides, and they were kind of floating around. And I saw this silver cord float by in front of me. I didn't know what that was about, but there's a silver cord. And then I looked down at my body and I saw blue things coming out of my legs. What it was I didn't know this at the time, but I even zoomed down and I sat at my waist watching these blue forms come out of my legs. And then I was all of a sudden back up at the ceiling level again. And that was my spirit. I was my consciousness and my spirit that had left the upper part of my body, but I was now watching the spirit and my coming out of the lower half of my body. And then it started to coagulate in again. I did see a pin of light off to my right coming closer. I didn't pay attention to it because I was interested in what's going on down here. And I felt great. And this all seemed very normal. I'd been here before. And as my spirit coagulated up again and into one form, I felt like a bubble. And do you remember the bubbles that I saw in my first near-death experience? I felt like a bubble. And I was now sitting in a wand. I felt like I was sitting in a wand of love. Like, if you can remember a child blowing bubbles with a wand, that's the kind of wand I was sitting in. Now, this is important because I sang those songs when I prayed, breathe upon me, breath of God. Now, what better way for God to have created my near-death experience than with presenting me as a bubble in a wand that he had blown me from. And this light came up and it was coming real fast, and all of a sudden it stopped in the room and it grew up, and here was this spiritual being. And I didn't know who the spiritual being was, because I'm nobody. I didn't think it would be be Jesus or anything. I thought it was a spiritual being. The light was so bright, I couldn't see his face. I did draw a picture of him. That's what's featured on my Facebook page. And I thought he had wings because I thought I saw a wing, but the light was so bright. And when I put the light around him on the picture, my daughter did it for me. Then I was kind of wondering, was it the light I saw, or was it actually wing? And anyway, he was infused with light, and light was coming out of his heart center. He reached out his hand to me and he said, "It's time to come home, Jan." And my first thought was my daughter Gina, because we're real close, and he knew what I was thinking, and he said she'll be okay. So I thought, okay, then I'm going to come. So, because I wanted to stay, I didn't want to go back, but he wanted me to know something. And there was another light coming from the distance in the upper left. And, but in the meantime, while that was coming closer, I was taken by spiritual beings clear up into the sky, way up into the sky. We lived in a country on a 75-acre ranch, and I could see our acreage, the neighbor's acreage, clear down the road. And I saw pins of light, coming up the country road. And they were real little. But as I watched them, it was important that I watched them. And I was watching from above, but I felt like I was in that vehicle, which happened to be an ambulance, because he was showing me the future of what was going to happen if I decided to stay. That ambulance was coming, and I was also in the ambulance. I was up there watching, and I could feel the road as the ambulance drove over the road, the little bumps in the road. I could hear the tires going over the gravel, just like I was right next to the gravel. I had all perspectives, and I could see myself in a little person like that down in the room. That came up, and what they were going to do is they were going to find that I had died. That was the whole point of that. Then I still wanted to go. So then I was down, and this second light was God. He had the light of God, which you've all talked about today. And he grew up, he enlarged, and it looked like with the bubbling clouds around it, it kind of had a tunnel effect. And Jesus's hair, well, actually now you know it was Jesus. But anyway, I'll tell you how I find that out. I didn't know it was Jesus, but this being's hair was going across his face, and it was going toward the tunnel. And I was slowly going toward the tunnel. But at this point, I was right on the edge of the tunnel. I couldn't have gone any farther without having gone into that tunnel. And they wanted me to know something else. So they showed me a picture of my middle son. It was a holographic picture of my middle son. And I knew something was going to happen with my middle son. And if I didn't stay for that, his life was going to go in a different direction. How did I know that? Unless it was pre-planned. So when I saw that, I knew I couldn't go. I loved him enough. I wanted to stay. I wanted to stay and help him through whatever it was. So at that point, I told the being, I'm not ready to go yet. And I could tell he was smiling, and he nodded his head. And all of a sudden, then I was sitting down. In my blue physical form, wasn't like this. It was kind of like this, but didn't have all of our features. I sat down in Jan's body, because she was called Jan at the time, and I had my spirit hands on my knees, and I rocked back and forth with my spirit body until I could lay down in her body and help her sit up and gasp for air. So then I decided to stay in Jan's body, and Jan didn't know. Jan didn't know what happened. I sat up and cried all night long because I didn't know what happened. Never heard a near-death experience. I thought, why does this stuff keep happening to me? And I didn't tell anybody because I didn't know how to explain it. I've been seeing doctors because of my car accident. Things were bad enough. This was just going to compound the situation. So I kept my mouth shut. And so a couple of years later, as God works, he had my daughter giving given her nightmares, and she wanted to find out what these nightmares were about. She called me from college, and she said, "Would you help me?" So I did. I said I didn't know anything about dreams, so I said, "Come up for the weekend. We'll go to the bookstore and see if we can find anything out about dreams." Well, we did find out about the dreams, and my eyesight was drawn to a book, and for some reason, like magnet, And so I said, "This is the one we need to get." And so I read it for her, and I explained to her, what this book was saying about her dream. It did solve her dream. But at the very end of the book, as I was reading, it explained what happened to me. So he was killing two birds with one stone. I jest with that. I'm not saying we do that, but it's just the same. Anyway, he took care of two problems with just that one incident. And so Gina's dreams went away, and I knew what was going on with this. So that set me out on a path of discovery where I could find out what these dying processes were about. It took me to angels, and I saw the sumo wrestler. He was an angel, but what they refer to as a watcher in the Bible, because he just watched me. And she was she was a spiritual being too. So there's angels out there that help us all the time. And I still kept everything quiet, because how can you explain something like this? But then what got me out of my box? Okay, what got me out of my box? My marriage fell apart, like everybody's, like a lot of 75% of near-death speakers, near-death experiencers' lives do, because we don't know each other, and so many crazy things start happening. The TV would come on in the middle of the night. That was the electrical phenomena. I was draining the batteries in my watches, and my husband kept bringing home watches. And in my mind, I was thinking, he's really buying cheap watches. Poor guy, poor guy. And I had a pile of watches, and that were dying. So I ended up buying a pocket watch, which led me to an invention, which is in the book too. But then the telephone would ring for no reason. And that was when the caller ID first came out. And I was getting really irritated with this phone ringing and nobody being there. Because when I'd answer the phone, I would get this tone, saying, "I'm sorry, you've reached a non-working number. Please check your number and dial again." Well, because I would call the number back. I was thinking, okay, he's having an affair. I'm going to call and I'm going to talk to this girl, whoever she is, and stop this right now. So, because it happened so many times, I was gonna talk to her, but nothing was ever working. I called the number right back. Nothing was ever working. Now, what are the chances you might get a wrong number? But even the Caribbean, no, nothing worked. And so I thought he was having an affair, and he thought because of my love everybody, I was compassionate and stuff, that he was tending not to trust me. And then he gave me a cell phone, and my first cell phone, and the batteries kept dying on that. But our marriage fell apart, and I moved to Boise to be with my mom while the property was separated. My mom and dad was sold. It did not sell for many years because the market was down, and God had plans of his own. Because in the meantime, I had learned there that, I didn't have much of anything, because I was waiting to come back. I was waiting for the house to sell, and I was going to come back and find a different job. And I realized I was happy. I didn't have anything, but I was happy. I was surrounded by people who loved me unconditionally, and I didn't need anything. All I needed was love, because that's really important. Because when I sat down in my body with that third near-death experience, I heard, "Love is the only thing that matters." And it kept echoing over and over again. "Love is the only thing that matters. Love is the only thing that matters. Love is the only thing that matters." As I got back in my body, and it echoes in my soul today. Love is the only thing that matters. I think about that every day, 20,000 times a day. I'm thinking about it all the time. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that who's had near-death experiences. I evaluate everything that I do because I want to make sure that what I do expresses love. I mean, I'm still human. I do have problems like that, but I fight that with the ego because the ego wants what it wants, so I do fight with that. But then I found I did come back because my son Kurt had called me and he wanted help with rent, and he said, come back and share a place with me, Mom. I'd like to get a little nicer place, and you can pay part of the rent. So I thought that was great, and I went back. But that put me in the right place for what was going to happen with my son Kurt. He got himself into trouble, and with alcohol. It was a college town, and I noticed he was not going to his classes like he was supposed to. And I said, why aren't you going to your classes? And he says, because the counselor doesn't like me and I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. And so I told him, it was very calm conversation. And I said, you won't see any light at the end of the tunnel, Kurt, until you start doing what you're supposed to do. And then you'll get there. And as I said that, I saw a light go on over his head. And he was looking into his bedroom. And from that moment on, the very next day, he went out and got a bike so that he would not be driving without a license. And he did everything. I took him everywhere he needed to go. Or his girlfriend or whoever at the time was in his life would take him wherever he needed to go. And now he's through it. And he's married. No, not married. He was married, but he's got a beautiful 7-year-old daughter, and well respected at a major corporation. So you can get through anything. You don't define yourself through what happens, because these are all lessons for us through our experience of life. And God laid it in his mind to invite me to live with him so that I would be in the right place. And God gave me that subtle message that Kurt said, I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel, so that I knew that that was what I stayed for when I was before that light, just about to enter that tunnel. How great is that? And then I found this coupon. When we were living together, there was this coupon, Groupon, okay? I wanted to see what coupons they had, just like everybody else in those times. And there was this one for a soul painting that came up. And this soul painting, I thought, that's kind of interesting. And so I wanted to see what she would paint. I saw my soul, it was blue. I thought, if she's authentic, she'll paint something blue. I didn't know what a soul painting was. As I made the appointment, she had called me back because I was early in the morning and I was just waking up. And just as I was waking up, I heard namaste. And then the phone rang. I thought, what's that about? It was her. And I made an appointment for myself and my daughter because she wanted to get a soul painting done too. We went to the appointment. I didn't know what namaste meant. And when we went into her office, she told us to go down this ramp to where her office was, and she would meet us there. On the outside of her office was namaste. So I asked her what that meant, and it was my soul honors your soul, and I heard that before. So this was obviously a place I needed to be. And so she asked me if I knew what a soul painting was, and I said, no, I don't know what a soul painting is for sure. And she said, I say a prayer with your permission. I connect with the heavenly records, and I paint what they want me to paint. That's an important message for you. And so it was an hour long. It was only a small picture, but each color meant something, and which is important too, because I forgot to mention, because when in the third near-death experience, I got this download of information and these flashes of visions that, in front of my face, which didn't make sense to me at the time. But I knew everything was the way it should be, and everything was perfect. And I keep that this is important to my story because those visions were of things that happened. So whether it was a life review, I don't know because I didn't get the feelings attached with it. But what I do know was he was showing me where he was in my life. That he was with me. He was with me when I was a little girl. He was with me when I had the car accident. He was with me when I went to the Miracle Crusade. These were all things he was showing me, that he was there, and that of course, he is us. Because if you recall, my soul is blue, and Colton Burpo, who had his near-death experience in the book but not in the movie, explains that he saw the Holy Spirit in heaven. And when his dad asked him what it looked like, and he said, "It's blue. It's the blue of the sky." And yeah, I often look up at the sky and I think, oh, is that the Holy Spirit? And we just think it's the sky because it's, it was that color blue. Because the silver cord is what tethers us to heaven. That was in the near-death experience. So we are all, our soul is our part of the Holy Spirit. It's not just our soul, it's our portion of the Holy Spirit. So we are one. The silver cord attaches us to each other. We are all one body, just like it says in the Bible, one body, many parts. And so what she painted on this Day of the Soul painting, she painted my near-death experience. I left there because after we got about 45 minutes in, and I looked at my daughter and I said, "You know what she's painting?" And she nodded her head yes. She recognized it too. So everything keeps going back to this near-death experience. And I thought, what am I supposed to do? And so and this was the same time frame that Colton Burpo's movie came out. And I hadn't read the book yet. So I watched the movie, read the book, and found out that the Holy Spirit was blue in his book too. There were so many similarities with his story and my story, because I did find out who Jesus was eventually, because as near-death experiences do, they try unusual things. And on Facebook, there was this Facebook page that it was a worldwide meditation. And if you participate, everybody throughout the world that was participating, were going to do it at the same time. And we were supposed to send our energy out to Mother Earth and to the environment to raise the energy of Mother Earth. And I know we're spiritual beings now. I saw it. I've experienced it. And we are not limited to our physical body either. We can send energy out. You can actually hug somebody with your energy, and I've shown that with wands at the IN's conference. And so I wanted to participate. I said, it can't hurt. I had the time. I could do that. So I sat down in my bedroom at my computer, and at the specified time, I clicked on this meditation. We all listened to the same music. And as I did that, I settled into the meditation, and then it happened again. Jesus came. But this time he took my body, and I was frozen. And he appeared in exactly the same way as he did in my near-death experience. He came as the pin of light, and he grew up into that being. But then he came closer and closer and closer until all I could see is his left eye. But I knew it was him because I had seen him full face in front of me. It was him. And he was just like a Cain's on his painting. And that was also featured in Heaven is for Real. But when I could see only his left eye in my mind, he started to cry, and I saw a big tear come down his eye, and he let me feel. He connected to my consciousness again, and he let me feel all the pain and all the sorrow for what we have done to this world. I sat there and I was frozen, crying for a good half hour. I could not move. I just sobbed with him for what we have done. And then half hour into it, it all changed. And then he shot me with the most powerful rays of love you can imagine. And I felt my body arching back, and it went, all this love went into my heart center. And I was stunned with all these rays that hit me. And I knew what was going on, and I knew it was Jesus, and I knew it was Jesus there at that time with me at the near-death experience. I just didn't think I was worthy enough back then to have had him come greet me. He was the one that was coming to greet me, to take me home. So that's what I knew that. And as we know, these after near-death experiences, your experiences don't end. So one other night, I was brought up to heaven for a thou shalt not judge review. As heaven worked it, he had me meet and fall in love with a gentleman after my divorce from Europe. We met on the computer. I was helping write him practice English. And eventually we met and fell in love, and he took me to Europe. And so I've done a lot of traveling there. And by that traveling, I saw how I have misjudged people here. Because when I was a little girl, I judged my next door neighbor's dad because he wore a skimpy swimming suit. And it wasn't like the short looking swimming suit, the short tight looking swimming suit that we normally wear in today. They didn't TV back then. We didn't even have a TV back then, because it just came out when I was a child. And so there was no Olympics on television. So those tight swimsuits, I didn't know anything about them. He was very, very nice gentleman, very loving of his children. I just had judged him because of his swimming suit. And so when I met this guy, Bob, we met. He was talking about he loves to swim, and he wanted to know what type of swimsuits we wore over here. And I told him what type, and he said, why do they wear those things? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, they have so much cloth around it just drags in the water. We wear, and he told me that it was the Speedo type swimsuits. I thought, I was thinking, oh my gosh, why would I meet somebody? What are the chances I'd meet somebody with that type swimsuit when I don't like that type swimsuit? So, but I learned over there, that's the very common swimming suit. That's the way of life. I had a culture change to take care of here. And I also learned that they have vineyards over there, and people share their friendship over wine and beer, and the socialization is very common there. And so I had misjudged my neighbor, but I had also misjudged my grandfather, who I thought was an alcoholic only because I had heard he was. And he lived in a home that I was not, it was an apartment above a store. And I thought, well, he must not have any money. He lives above a store. I had judged him because he didn't have a house like we did. And now going to Europe, I realized that that's very common. And it was very common for him too, because he came from Norway, and when he was a little boy. And so that could have been a very common way of him living in Norway when he was a little boy. And also he was in the war. He was in World War II. So was his drinking because, he was had drinks with his pals? And that was a way of socializing like they do over there? Was his drinking misconstrued, or was it post-traumatic stress from the war? I mean, I didn't know what his life was about. And that's what this whole "thou shalt not judge" was about. And they were happy because I realized I had misjudged people. They had brought Bob into my life to learn these lessons. I mean, what are the chances I would meet somebody from halfway around the world? And I also had a dream of him in a past or parallel life. I'm not sure which one. He saved me in that other life. So he's obviously a part of my soul group, and in this life had a contract to come find me. And so he followed his guidance and eventually found me. And now we are together, and he plays a very important part in my life. And without him, I would not have learned these important lessons that thou shalt not judge, because we don't know what somebody else's life is all about. I have difficulties with people at times, and I think, okay, that's not my problem. That's something they're supposed to learn about. What's important is how I react to it. So I try and react appropriately with love and just step out of the situation if need be. So that's how I handle things. And then there was another experience that I was taken up to heaven. I know I was talking to God up there because we were having a conversation, and I was standing beside him, and I looked down. I could look down, and I saw his legs. He was in human form at the time, although because he can take many forms. He had on the white gown just like Jesus had, only he was much, much more massive. He was gigantic, and his calves were real thick. They were just he was a giant of a person, but I couldn't see his face, and I wasn't allowed to see his face, and I didn't know that was in the Bible either, that you can't see my face or you won't live. So I turned to him and I said, "What's it all about?" And he said, he raised his hand, his right hand up in the air, and he said, "Behold." And as he raised his hand, I heard the Han Solo sword, that one from Star Wars. Okay, I heard it, but as I heard it, shooting light bolts went from around Earth, because we were looking down on Earth, and Earth was the size of a basketball clear out there. We were so far out in space, we could see the entire Earth, and it was the size of a basketball. And light beams went from behind it and from for it over us. What he was showing me was there are many worlds and many dimensions that he has created. And I also knew, I said, I get it. It's all about math. And he said, yes. That's when I knew it was the quantum theory. And he is quantum. He is the quantum king. He is actually quantum at its very essence. He is the fabric that holds this universe and everything together. And just by what he wants, things will happen because of the quantum theory. And that's in the next document. That will
yes, I have to stop you here because we only have 5 minutes left.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your story.
Sure.
It's just lovely.
Thank you.
Totally